Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation as well to this conference. I'm happy to talk today about one of my latest projects called Sonic Histories. And that's kind of an example for artistic mediation of kind of built heritage, material cultural heritage through audio augmented reality and through experimental composition. And so the segue of the sound in this installation is very well fitting towards this project as well. And this project is in a context of a larger digital exhibition, digital museum project called the Palácio das Belas Artes Lisboa. And I was invited last year for an artist residency at this project in their program Digital Spatialities, which was funded by the Culture Moves Europe program by the EU. And the center of the work of Palácio das Belas Artes is the Palácio Iglesias, which is located in the center of Lisbon in Baixo Chiado. And that's a building with a very rich history, which is not accessible anymore to the public since 2015, since it was bought as investment property, and since then it's closed off from the public. But that's exactly the point of that project as well. So the question is, how can one approach a physical space with all its historic layers and lived histories with digital artistic means? And how can one create kind of a meta experience that makes this place accessible again, as it's closed off physically, but then digitally accessible and allows to rethink, reimagine, and reinterpret it. And uh, the whole project revolves mainly as a digital exhibition space around the website, where all these artistic projects are then displayed. And last year was quite an intense year for the project, which is run by Lia Carreira as a curator and manager, who is also today in the audience. So if you have specific questions toward this project, specifically, you can also ask in the chat, and she will surely answer your question as well. But they had like five international artists visiting in the last year. I was one of them. There were 7 workshops taking place on various topics, from creative coding over 3D printing, over creative workshops, in all revolving and dealing with the building itself, as well as 2 exhibitions that took place on the website. And so what I'm trying to do and where I'm coming from, I will give a little bit of an like theoretical and context introduction about my view on the artistic work as well. So I'm an art mediator and cultural mediator, and this kind of point of view also um, gets into my artistic work as a composer and sound artist, and XR creator in this project. And so what I'm always getting at is kind of a holistic experience. So how can we bridge like physical displays, physical spaces as this historic building with digital displays and kind of alternate realities into one experience, that because people don't necessarily distinguish between, okay, that's a digital layer, that's the physical space, but you create one experience that comes together. And augmented reality and XR as a medium is particularly suited to actually bridge those two sides. And of course, in cultural heritage mediation, you have already projects that employ augmented reality, for example, by creating augmented walks in the city where you, on the one hand, tell stories about locations. You can overlay them with historical material, archive material. You could also take, for example, collection items from a museum and place them in different contexts inside the public space, and there was create new contexts about for these collection items, or you could take artistic strategies and bring them also into public space, as the project by Imvisar and Mazer in Dublin were doing. So they were basically taking Mazer's artistic language as a street artist and then also bringing it through augmented reality outside of the gallery and also augmenting the inside space. And there was creating another layer kind of on top of the physical artworks. And so if you think about what augmented reality actually can do in mediation, it can enrich physical spaces and objects. So a physical object or a building can become kind of an information hub or also an experience hub. And every place can become a place for learning, can become an exhibition space. You can transfer objects to other sites and use objects or buildings as a starting point and also an anchor point for dialogues or for artistic experiments. So the devices that you use to access this kind of augmented reality act as a lens or a frame into a different layer, a different experience. And it's really about the manipulation value, the interaction with a cultural heritage object or a building that's in the forefront if you use augmented reality as a mediation medium. But as we saw in the previous slide as well, augmented reality is oftentimes mainly about like visual media and visual layers. So that's oftentimes used for that. But what I'm mainly interested in is actually keeping the eyes of the participants, of the visitors, free to experience the spaces themselves, especially if we talk about historical spaces. We want to actually experience those spaces and lead the visitors in exploring the spaces themselves. And so for that and focusing on sound, I found one paradigm called sound scenography a few years back in a workshop by Museumsakademie and in the work of Idee und Klang. And that was for me a really intriguing concept that I then delved further into and now employ also in my work. And so, what is sound scenography about? So, it's mainly about the process of staging spaces and environments through sound. So, bridging basically the physical space and like an exhibition design or using the traits and the properties of a physical space and then using sound to really create an experience. And in the end, museum experiences and cultural heritage experiences, lived experiences are never really silent. So it totally makes sense to also focus on sound, to make connections with the lived experience that are lived in sound. All of our experiences are multisensory. And so, yeah, it makes totally sense to also use that medium when thinking about creating an experience about built cultural heritage. And so, why using sound? So, music in the end is really a universal language. So, Uli Drexler said that last week as well at the CIMIX conference. And I fully agree, as it really opens up central and emotional access to topics, places, and objects. So, music can directly affect us as human beings. And there was sonic spaces really enable also an immersion into a story. It can enable also an immersion into other times and places and really transport you as a visitor and listener into those spaces. But it also keeps the gaze of the visitors free, as we have no screens that are really between the visitor and the surrounding space. And so sound sonography really acts as an augmentation of the environment, and any space becomes an exhibition space. With Initiative Klangszenografie, where I'm also part of creating sound experiences for museums, we looked into, okay, what kind of storytelling formats can we actually use there, and also exhibition formats. And so on the one hand, of course, you can always create a linear sound experience, a linear story, like an audio walk that really leads you through the story from a defined starting point to a defined endpoint. But you can also break that up as a non-linear sound experience where you can either explore a space or also like an interactive audio play can take decisions either by physical moving through the space or by answering questions and really steer that way, like in a game, the direction of the story, or you can really make it as a location-based sound experience, exploring the space where you physically move through a sonic environment that is placed in a space. And well, maybe to give you some context of works that were either done by me or also were inspirations for my work. On the one hand, I worked on a performance last year, kind of also augmenting a space. That was the performance damals 2024, back in the days 2024, as part of a project Vier Dimensionen Ips by Open Glam. And so that was basically a performance piece where we started from lived memories of the city by inhabitants and also a lot of oral history interviews and actually staged a performance in the city space as kind of a fictive guided tour through the city that goes back from the future into the year 2024 and really takes a different kind of look onto the city and the lived histories, the stories behind the buildings, and unfolding a story in the now, but from the perspective of the future. And there also sound played a huge role. So we used a silent disco system. So every performer, but also every participant of that tour had headphones on. And so with this performance on the one hand, as well as with the sound, we were kind of augmenting the space, so extending, altering the space with stories, actions, and kind of creating an alternate reality informed by lived histories. So it's an artistic way of also dealing with lived histories of a space. On the other hand, bringing that idea more into the technological realm, there's a future walk at Kulturforum in Berlin, an interactive audio experience, also kind of using your mobile phone in that experience as a communication device with a researcher in the future. That was built in the Museum 4.0 project in Germany a few years back. And so you're really constantly interacting with this researcher in the future and with by interacting with this fictive character, you're exploring the outside space of the museums and also the collections, and it leads you to through a story. Um, Also, another way of using kind of sound sonography in public spaces is the Augarten AR app by Sonic Traces, a very minimalistic application which basically tells stories inside the Augarten. It's GPS triggered and also uses a visual positioning system. And so you have this minimalistic interface where you see kind of when you approach an area in the space where a story is told. And so in the end, the listeners meet virtual persons in the Augarten and get really immersed into the stories of the past. Also, by using spatial audio, you hear steps around you when people approach you, and so you get really immersed in the story. And the experience also invites visitors to visit the nearby Museum. So it's kind of a teaser content to bring people also in the museum. But it's really focused on sound and really make you perceive the area in a different way. And also, an exhibition I saw while I was at the residency in Lisbon was the Evidence exhibition by Soundwalk Collective and Patti Smith. So they also look into um, three different authors and their perceptions of spaces, and try to kind of relive the experiences these authors um, tell in their poetry. And so also here they use a 3D audio system and set the exhibition space up that you have like three different circles for the three different cultural landscapes that are explored, all with seating systems, with seatings around like a little bit like a fireplace, and at each seat you can experience a story, and you're immersed into an audio experience, and you can explore that exhibition space and the audioscape and soundscape on your own by physically walking through the space. So also really interesting exhibition, and which also highlights the interplay between space and the sound experience. And so with that, I was starting also into developing the project Sonic Histories, where I will talk a little bit about the concept. It's a work in progress. There was one prototype exhibition in Sweden. I will also show some material of, and more will be shown in April in Lisbon. But the backdrop of this project is for me really the concept of forensic aesthetics. So I use a building as a witness of lived histories that are inscribed in the materiality. But these inscribed histories really need a translation, an artistic translation, to become again accessible and experienceable and to stay in the active cultural memory. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my sonic and compositional translation. And I use the inscriptions in the building as kind of architectural notations to then translate into sound and music. And additionally, to my own lived experience around the building, so I was spending a lot of time doing field recordings and documenting the building and just immersing myself in the area around the building and what's happening there for the weeks of my residency in Lisbon. So I'm taking these experiences as a basis and these inscriptions as well. And so you see here some examples of the photographs I was taking from the building, so detailed photographs that can then serve as kind of graphic notations or architectural scores for the musical translations. And as one main outcome of this project, I will develop a location-based AR sound installation where the potential pasts and speculative futures of the building are woven into a physically explorable soundscape that is then translated and reinterpreted musically. So for me, it's really the search of the core of this kind of empty building as a living organism. So how does the building really resonate its past, its possible futures, the current events, the life that happens in front of the building and in the city of Lisbon? So how does a building kind of perceive its surroundings? And so the resulting soundscapes and the sonic worlds from this kind of living void then should enable the immersion into invisible worlds, into stories, into other times and spaces of the buildings. And so I have this kind of concept image displayed here. So I'm working with spatial audio. Spatial audio is always addressing how do we perceive audio as a human being, but it should really lead the visitor through also placing audio persistently in the physical space to explore the building and how it perceives its surroundings, explore the building also physically, like touching the skin of the building, feeling the structures, feeling the materiality, and really actively exploring. And so for me, it's important to persistently place audio in the space. So I'm using a visual positioning system, or will use a visual positioning system for that. Niantic, amongst others, have developed a technology for that that uses also the camera image of the building and of the surroundings to place persistently objects there. And starting point for me for these experimental sonic translations are always field recordings around the building. And I also took a lot of recordings from resonances inside the materiality, for example, with a geophone, um, soundscapes in the direct vicinity of the Palácio, but also looking into the sonic traditions of the city, and taking inspirations from there. And then these recordings will be then translated into experimental compositions and sound design and become audible and re-experienceable uh, in the space directly. Again, I will harness music as kind of this universal language and work from the architectural scores of the building. I will use composition, or I'm using composition basically as the translation process of the collected sonic traces into a sound experience. Um, Adding also additional historic sound material here and there and reimagined soundscapes, short poetic texts that also really lead the viewer and lead the visitor into the experience. And the result will be are concept pieces that focus on specific sonic worlds. One of them is the piece Silence, and that's the one that was already exhibited in Sweden as a prototype, and that really looks into this question if an empty building as a living organism is silent and how it perceives and resonates the world around it. And so in Sweden, well, these pieces are composed to be viewed originally at the building itself and really playing with the materiality of the building, playing with certain positions at the building where these stories make sense, where they lead you to explore the building more, exploring the materiality. But for this prototype, I was actually translating this first composition into a completely different space. In Sweden, in the Inter Art Center in Malmö, during a spatial audio workshop, I was using the new Sonic system for that, where you can build kind of this soundscape where you can physically walk through. And we were using a cafe space as an exhibition space and kind of working with the spatial traits there. And so this piece has different chapters, and I will shortly talk a little bit about the chapters and give you a brief glimpse into what it sounds like. So my starting point into the piece is really kind of an arrival at the space, getting into interaction with the space, feeling the space, and kind of a meditation to arrive and to connect. And this was taking place in the exhibition in Sweden at a seating area where you could sit down, you could close your eyes, and really get in touch. And I will play a brief snippet of what that sounds like.
Is an empty building really silent? Breathe with me. Deep and slow.
And so, as you can hear, I'm taking up there as well field recordings and sounds from the materiality of the building itself and resonances that then really bring you into connection to the built heritage. Um, Another part of that piece is really exploring different materialities and getting in touch with the materialities.
I'm slowly falling apart, peeling my layers, Can you feel the grainy and coarse structure of the plaster?
As well as in the next part, then really listening to what is resonating in the building itself. So these are mainly recordings of drone sounds and resonances of the surrounding um, things that happen in the vicinity of the building, how it's perceived by the materiality of the building itself.
Hold your ear against the wall and listen closely to what's resonating in me.
Or then also the question, how does the building actually perceive its surroundings? And there I'm working with compressed time and also really compressing actions that are happening around the building as a different way of perceiving the outside world. And that really immerses the listeners into a soundscape of what's happening around the building.
Let me take you to the life outside as I hear it.
So, as the time is already quite quite at the end for my talk, I will wrap up. So, what you saw there in this prototype is I had to translate, of course, uh, things that are usually related to specific parts of the building, or will then be placed as specific parts of the building where they make sense into a spatial exhibition. And so, what's really important on the one hand, when working with the building itself, but also when working with different exhibition spaces and translating kind of an experience, is really work with the available space, work with the traits that are there. Where does it make sense to place a certain chapter? Where does it interact with the space and how does it interact with the space? And to really integrate the spatial design, the storytelling and auditory experience into a kind of multisensory and holistic experience. And it's also important to notice no space is a completely blank canvas. Each room has its own inscribed histories, and one is overlaying multiple histories by transferring or translating a work to a new place that it's not the origin. And kind of transferring and installing a work in a different space than the one it was developed originally for needs also oftentimes visual and material references to the place of origin. So we used this very empty cafe space with no visual references, but I could just use some material references with the same materials inside the space. But to really make sense, some visual references, if you translate it, are also um, really important to make this jump. And it's really about harnessing the power of sound and music as a universal language, where there are many experimental practices for that. for use in a museum. It really needs a framework for the use and a deeper understanding of sound in cultural heritage in museums as part of an holistic experience. And also another, uh, for me, interesting insight and really important approach is make the technology either invisible and a natural part of the experience you don't really notice this kind of technological intermediary, but it's one seamless experience, or give it a role. Like as I mentioned in the future walk, for example, then your phone suddenly becomes a tool to communicate with a different time or with a person at a different time. So it has a clear role in your experience. So that's from me. I'm looking forward to questions and comments.